On the evening of May 24, 1877, at a private dinner party in Mayfair, the Prince of Wales turned to the woman seated beside him, a married woman he had never met before, and said something that would change both their lives forever. Within weeks, she would become the most famous woman in England. Within months, she would become his mistress. And within 3 years, a secret pregnancy would tear apart the most scandalous love affair the Victorian monarchy had ever seen. To understand how a clergyman's daughter from a tiny island conquered London and captured a future king, we need to start at the beginning. She was born in a place most people in London had never even heard of, the island of Jersey, a speck of British territory floating in the English Channel, closer to France than to England. Just 11 miles long and 5 miles wide. A place of rocky coastlines, fishing boats, and quiet country lanes where the seasons turned slowly and nothing much ever seemed to change. And in the autumn of 1853, inside the old rectory of St. Saviour's Church on the 13th of October, a baby girl arrived who would one day become the most talked-about woman in the entire British Empire. Her name was Emilie Charlotte Le Breton, but nobody would ever call her that. From childhood, she was known simply as Lillie, a name born from her own childish attempts to pronounce Emily. It stuck, and eventually it would become the most whispered name in every drawing room, every gentleman's club, and every royal palace in the land. Lillie was the only girl in a household of boys. 6 brothers surrounded her: Francis, William, Trevor, Maurice, Clement, and the youngest, Reginald. They were rough, loud, and wild, and Lillie matched every single one of them. She climbed trees, she vaulted fences. She rode horses bareback along the Jersey beaches with sand flying behind her and the wind tearing through her hair. Her French governess threw up her hands in despair. She simply could not manage this girl. So Lillie was educated alongside her brothers by their tutor, learning Latin, Greek, mathematics, German, and French. It was an education far broader and far more rigorous than anything typically given to girls of that era, and it made Lillie Le Breton something genuinely rare in Victorian society. A woman who was not only beautiful but dangerously well-read and intellectually sharp. Years later, she would write about those days with unmistakable pride. Living the life of my brothers transformed me into an incorrigible tomboy. I could climb trees and vault fences with the best of them, and I entered with infinite relish into their practical jokes. Her father, the Very Reverend William Corbett Le Breton, was the Dean of Jersey, the highest-ranking clergyman on the island. He had held the position since 1850, appointed at the remarkably young age of 34. It was a position of enormous respectability, a position that demanded moral authority, spiritual leadership, and above all, the appearance of an upright life. And yet, behind the closed doors of the rectory, the Dean of Jersey was living a double life that would foreshadow his daughter's own future in ways nobody could have predicted. William Le Breton was a womanizer, not a discreet one, a serial philanderer who fathered illegitimate children with women from his own congregation, the very women who sat in his pews on Sunday mornings, who confided in him, who trusted him. The parishioners whispered about it for years. Children around the island bore a suspicious resemblance to the Dean. They had his eyes, his good looks, his unmistakable features. It was the kind of open secret that everyone knew and nobody spoke about in polite company. His wife, Emilie, a woman renowned in her own youth for her beauty, a beauty she had passed directly to her only daughter, endured her husband's betrayals for decades. She retreated slowly into eccentricity, reportedly taking a pet seagull with her on outings around Jersey, before eventually withdrawing from public life altogether. By 1880, she had finally had enough. She left him for good, and the disgraced Dean fled the island entirely. But before that final break, something happened to young Lillie that left a mark far deeper than any scandal that followed. According to biographers, when Lillie was around 16 years old, she fell in love with a local boy from the island. It was a first romance, innocent, consuming, the kind of love that fills every waking thought. Her father, however, forbade the relationship. He refused to explain why. He simply ordered Lillie to stop seeing the boy. But Lillie, stubborn and sharp as she had always been, refused to accept a command without a reason. She pressed her father until he had no choice but to confess the devastating truth. The boy was her half-brother, the illegitimate product of one of her father's countless affairs. Imagine that moment. Imagine discovering that the person you loved was your own flesh and blood, and that your father, the man of God, the moral leader of your community, was the reason why. It is a detail that casts a long shadow over everything that followed, because Lillie Langtry grew up watching her father, a man who stood behind a pulpit every Sunday preaching about virtue, live one life in public and an entirely different life in private. She watched her mother suffer in silence while her father pursued woman after woman without consequence. And she learned, perhaps without even fully realizing it, the lesson that would define her entire life. The world was built on appearances. Respectability was a performance. The rules existed for other people. And beauty, real, devastating, weaponized beauty, was the most powerful currency a woman in Victorian England could ever possess. By her late teens, that beauty had emerged in full and astonishing force. Suitors arrived at the rectory with increasing frequency. Her father, now playing the role of protective patriarch, turned them all away. But Lillie had no interest in the local boys of Jersey anymore. She had visited London once, at the age of 15, through the patronage of Lord Suffield, and although that first trip had been a humiliating disaster, she felt clumsy, out of place, and painfully aware that her clothes were inferior even to those of the maids. The seed had been planted. She knew there was a world beyond Jersey's shores, a world of power and glamour and possibility, and she was determined to reach it. Then, in 1874, her escape arrived in the most literal way imaginable. It sailed into the harbour on an 80-foot yacht called the Red Gauntlet. The yacht belonged to Edward Langtry, a 26-year-old Irish widower from Belfast, the heir to a shipbuilding family. He was recently bereaved, quiet, somewhat shy, but he had money, or at least he appeared to, and he had a yacht. And for Lillie Le Breton, that combination was more than enough. On March 9, 1874, they married at St. Saviour's Church, her father presiding over the ceremony with whatever internal contradictions he was able to suppress. The bride was 20 years old, and many years later, looking back on that day with the brutal, unflinching honesty that became her trademark, Lillie would deliver one of the most savage lines ever spoken about a marriage. "One day there came into the harbour the most beautiful yacht," she wrote. "I met the owner and fell in love with the yacht. To become the mistress of the yacht, I married the owner." The marriage was a disaster almost from the first day. Edward Langtry, Ned as everyone called him, was a man profoundly unsuited to the role Lillie needed him to play. He was shy, he was quiet. One acquaintance called him pudgy. Another simply described him as dull. He loved the sea, he loved fishing, he loved the quiet rhythms of country life, and he absolutely, completely, hopelessly hated London. The drawing rooms and dinner parties and social performances that gave Lillie life drained every ounce of energy from Ned's soul. He felt, as he confided to someone later, quite like a fish out of water. And he was not, it turned out, nearly as wealthy as Lillie had assumed. For 2 years they lived near Southampton, and Lillie grew increasingly restless and frustrated. She had traded one island for another kind of isolation. Then she contracted typhoid fever, or so the story goes, and she convinced Ned that a move to London would be essential for her recovery. It was a masterful piece of manipulation. Ned, who had no desire whatsoever to live in the capital, agreed. In January 1876, they rented a small flat in Eaton Place, Belgravia, and then nothing happened. For an entire year, the Langtrys were invisible. They knew nobody in London society. They received no invitations. They attended no events. Ned retreated into misery and increasingly into drink. Lillie pressed and repressed her one evening dress, a simple unadorned black gown, and waited. She attended 2 or 3 parties a night when she could find someone to invite her, dragging the increasingly reluctant Ned along as her social ticket. She was waiting for the door to open. She was waiting for someone to notice her. She just didn't know yet that when that door finally opened, the person standing behind it would be the most powerful man in the entire British Empire. That door was about to swing wide open, and behind it stood the heir to the throne of England himself, a man whose appetite for beautiful women had already nearly destroyed the monarchy once before. The night that changed everything arrived on April 29, 1877. Lord Ranelagh, a family connection through Lily's brother Clement, who had recently married Ranelagh's illegitimate daughter Alice, invited Lily to a reception at 23 Lounded Square, Knightsbridge, the grand home of Sir John and Lady Seabright. It was a gathering of London's artistic and aristocratic elite, painters, poets, lords, politicians, society hostesses, all dressed in their finest, glittering with jewels and self-importance. Lily arrived in mourning. Her youngest brother, Reginald, had been killed in a riding accident. He was just 21 years old. So while every other woman in the room sparkled in elaborate gowns adorned with ribbons and bows and diamonds, Lily wore a plain black dress, simple, fitted, no jewelry, no decoration, not a single ornament, and it was the most brilliant entrance she would ever make. Against the peacock display of Victorian fashion, Lily's simplicity was like a thunderclap of silence in a noisy room. Every eye turned, her pale complexion, described by contemporaries as resembling a peach, her violet eyes, deep, arresting, impossible to look away from, her tall, graceful figure wrapped in unadorned black, like a portraited negative against a canvas of colour. Lord Randolph Churchill, Winston's father, was at that party. He would later describe her as a most beautiful creature, quite unknown, very poor, and they say she has but one black dress. Before the evening was over, artist Frank Miles had produced several rapid sketches of her, unable to resist capturing the moment of her discovery. Another guest, Sir John Everett Millais, himself a Jersey native and one of the most celebrated painters in England, asked if she would sit for a formal portrait. Within days, Miles's sketches were reproduced as postcards and put on sale in London shops. They sold in extraordinary numbers. They outsold every other portrait of every other society beauty on the market. Overnight, Lillie Langtry became the most sought-after woman in London. Invitations flooded in by the hour. Hostesses competed to have her at their events. Artists clamoured to paint her. Whistler wanted her. Burne-Jones wanted her. George Frederick Watts wanted her. When Millais finally completed his masterwork, titled A Jersey Lily, and it was exhibited at the Royal Academy, the painting had to be physically roped off. The crowds who came to see it were so vast, so pressing, so determined to get close to this image of the woman everyone was talking about, that the painting itself was in danger of being damaged. Albert Edward, the Prince of Wales, the future King Edward VII, known to his friends and to his many, many lovers, simply as Bertie. Now, to understand what happened next, to truly grasp the scale of what Lillie Langtry was walking into, you need to understand who Bertie was. Because the Prince of Wales in 1877 was not some innocent young royal falling in love for the first time. He was 35 years old. He had been married for 14 years to the beautiful Princess Alexandra of Denmark, a woman widely regarded as one of the most gracious and dignified members of the royal family. They had 6 children together. Their marriage had been arranged for dynastic purposes, as royal marriages always were, and while they maintained a cordial and even affectionate public relationship, the private reality was something else entirely. Bertie was a womanizer on a scale that still astonishes historians. Researchers have been able to identify at least 55 mistresses by name, and that number does not include casual encounters, brief liaisons, or the many dalliances that went unrecorded. He was a man of enormous appetites for food, for wine, for cigars, for gambling, and above all, for women. His mother, Queen Victoria, was horrified. She blamed Bertie's moral weakness for the premature death of his father, Prince Albert, who had died of typhoid in December 1861, just weeks after travelling to Cambridge to confront Bertie about an affair with an actress named Nellie Clifton. Victoria was convinced that the stress and distress of discovering his son's behaviour had weakened Albert's constitution and hastened his death. She never fully forgave Bertie. She excluded him from state affairs. She denied him any meaningful role in government. She left him with nothing to do except attend parties, race horses, smoke cigars the size of small branches, and pursue women with the single-minded determination of a man who had literally nothing else to fill his days. Just 7 years before meeting Lily, Bertie had been dragged into one of the most humiliating scandals of the Victorian age. Lady Harriet Mordaunt, the young wife of a Conservative Member of Parliament, had confessed to her husband that she had committed adultery and named the Prince of Wales among her lovers. Sir Charles Mordaunt had found love letters from Bertie in his wife's writing desk. The resulting divorce case forced the Prince of Wales to appear as a witness in open court. The first time a member of the royal family had been publicly associated with a divorce proceeding in living memory. Bertie denied the affair under oath. The jury chose to believe him, but the damage to his reputation was severe. The public hissed at him in the street. The press was merciless. And the episode served as a warning that should have given any sensible man pause. It did not give Bertie pause, because on May 24, 1877, Sir Alan Young, an explorer, a yachtsman, and one of Bertie's closest companions, arranged a private dinner at his house in Stratton Street, Mayfair. Just 10 guests around the table, and Bertie had specifically requested that the celebrated Mrs. Langtry be invited, and that she be seated directly next to him. Her husband Ned was placed at the far end of the table, as far from the prince and his wife as social protocol would allow. According to one widely repeated account of that evening, Bertie turned to Lillie and delivered an opening line that was both compliment and challenge. "I have seen your photographs all over London. I must say they hardly attest to your beauty. Handsome as my father, it was the perfect answer. Witty, self-deprecating, playful, flirtatious without being forward, confident without being presumptuous. It told Bertie exactly what he wanted to know. This woman was not just beautiful, she was clever. She could play the game, and Bertie was absolutely, irrevocably hooked. Within weeks, the affair had begun, and it would be conducted in a manner that shocked even a society accustomed to looking the other way. What followed was unlike anything Victorian England had ever witnessed. Most royal mistresses operated in the shadows. They were discreet, they were hidden. They understood that the price of a prince's affection was absolute silence about its nature. But Bertie did not hide Lillie Langtry. He did the opposite. He flaunted her. He insisted that every party he attended must include Lillie Langtry on the guest list, or he simply would not show up. Hostesses across London scrambled to secure her presence. She became the essential name on every invitation. He showered her with gifts, jewelry, dresses, access to a world of luxury and privilege that the daughter of a Jersey clergyman could never have imagined. And everywhere the Prince of Wales went, Mrs. Langtry followed. They rode together at dawn through Hyde Park. They attended the theatre together. They appeared side by side at racing events and garden parties and country house weekends. The social diary of the Langtrys now mirrored the social diary of the Prince of Wales exactly, and every person in London society knew precisely what that meant. But Bertie went even further. He arranged for Lillie to be formally presented at the royal court, to his own mother, Queen Victoria. This was audacious beyond measure. Victoria despised her son's mistresses. She disapproved of everything Bertie represented. But Bertie engineered the presentation anyway, pulling every lever of royal protocol to make it happen. And Lillie, in a moment of breathtaking, almost reckless cheek that revealed everything about her fearlessness and her understanding of spectacle, wore a headdress of 3 enormous white ostrich feathers to the ceremony. 3 white ostrich feathers, the official heraldic emblem of the Prince of Wales. It was a signal, bold, unmistakable, almost defiant, that every single person in that room instantly understood. Lillie Langtry was marking her territory. She was announcing, in a language that required no words, that she belonged to Bertie, and that she wanted the entire court to know it. Queen Victoria's reaction was not officially recorded, but one small, telling detail survives. Victoria personally went to the private chambers of her youngest son, Prince Leopold, Duke of Albany, and removed a portrait of Lillie Langtry that he had purchased from Frank Miles and hung above his bed. The Queen's youngest son, it seemed, was nursing his own infatuation with the Jersey Lily. Victoria was having none of it. Meanwhile, Princess Alexandra, Bertie's long-suffering wife, handled the situation with a grace and composure that still commands admiration from historians nearly 150 years later. She accepted Lillie's presence at court without public complaint. The 2 women reportedly developed what multiple sources describe as a respectful and affectionate relationship. Alexandra had spent 14 years watching her husband pursue other women. She had endured scandal after scandal. She had learned, through painful necessity, to accommodate what she could not prevent. And Lillie, to her credit, was never cruel or disrespectful to the princess. Whatever else she was, ambitious, calculating, ruthless in her social climbing, she understood where certain lines should not be crossed. According to long-standing tradition, the prince had a private residence constructed where he and Lillie could meet far from the constant surveillance of London's gossip columns. A house in Bournemouth, roughly 100 miles from the capital. The story claims that Lillie designed the house herself, and that a window still exists with their intertwined initials and hearts, etched into the glass by Lillie's own hand. However, it should be noted that modern academic research has cast significant doubt on this particular claim. Historian Anthony J. Camp, building on the work of biographer Jane Ridley, has presented evidence that the Bournemouth property known as the Red House was actually built by a women's rights campaigner named Emily Langton, and that the Lillie Langtry connection was a fabrication that emerged in the 1940s, decades after both Lillie and the prince were dead. Lillie herself made no mention of any Bournemouth house in her 1925 autobiography. What is beyond any dispute, however, is the intensity, the visibility, and the sheer brazenness of the affair itself. For nearly 3 years, Bertie and Lillie were the talk of Britain. The newspapers couldn't get enough of them. The public was fascinated, and London society simply adjusted to the new reality. Because when the future king decides to conduct his love life in broad daylight, everyone else learns to avert their gaze and keep smiling. George Bernard Shaw, watching all of this with his characteristically acid wit, delivered perhaps the most perceptive observation anyone made about Lillie Langtry during these years. "I resent Mrs. Langtry. She has no right to be intelligent, daring, and independent, as well as lovely." Because that was the truth that so many people failed to grasp. Lillie wasn't simply a pretty face being paraded around on a prince's arm. She could discuss literature with Oscar Wilde. She could debate politics with William Gladstone, who brought her books and offered to tutor her in English literature. She charmed Benjamin Disraeli. She held her own with the sharpest minds of the age, and she did it while navigating a social minefield that would have destroyed most women of her era. But even Lillie Langtry could not keep all her secrets hidden forever, because while the Prince of Wales believed he was the centre of Lillie's world, the truth was far more complicated. She had been playing a dangerous double game, and the consequences were about to catch up with her in the most devastating way possible. The cracks had been forming long before the final break. By 1879, Lillie had grown restless. The Prince of Wales was not, after all, the only man in England. And Lillie Langtry, the tomboy from Jersey who had learned from her father that fidelity was an optional virtue, was not the type of woman to limit herself to a single lover, even if that lover happened to be the future king. In April 1879, she began an affair with Prince Louis of Battenberg, a handsome young naval officer in his mid-20s. Louis was part of the extended royal family. He would later marry Princess Victoria of Hesse, making him Bertie's nephew by marriage. The irony was exquisite. Lillie was sleeping with the Prince of Wales and, simultaneously, with a man who was practically a member of his own family. But even that wasn't the full extent of it. At the same time, Lillie was conducting a third affair, this one truly secret, with Arthur Clarence Jones, a childhood friend from her Jersey days. Jones was a man she had known since she was a girl, an old friend of her brother's. Their relationship was conducted with far more discretion than any of her royal liaisons. The letters she wrote to him, addressed to Darling Artie, would not be discovered for nearly a century. In 1978, 65 of those letters surfaced at Christie's auction house in London, where they sold for £8,000. Their contents would fundamentally change how historians understood the events of 1880. But first, the end of the affair with Bertie. The traditional story is a dramatic one, and it comes in several slightly different versions. A sign, as always, that the truth has been filtered through decades of gossip and embellishment. In one account, Lillie arrived at a costume ball wearing an outfit identical to the prince's, a social transgression so outrageous that Bertie was visibly furious. In his world, no one upstaged the Prince of Wales. When he confronted her, Lillie, ever the provocateur, ever incapable of reading a room when her own defiance was at stake, allegedly picked up a scoop of ice cream and dropped it down the back of his collar. The Prince of Wales was emphatically not amused. He left the room. He did not make a scene. Princes do not make scenes in public. But the humiliation burned. And although the relationship did not end in a single explosive confrontation, that evening is widely regarded as the beginning of the end. There is a competing version. Some historians attribute the ice cream incident not to Lillie at all, but to a woman named Patsy Cornwallis West. In this telling, Bertie spun around in fury and simply assumed it was Lillie. Regardless of which version is true, and the truth may never be established with certainty. By the middle of 1880, the love affair between the Prince of Wales and the Jersey Lillie was effectively over, and then the real scandal detonated. In June 1880, Lillie Langtry discovered that she was pregnant. The immediate question, whispered in every corner of London society, was obvious. Who was the father? Nobody, absolutely nobody, believed that her husband Ned was responsible. The Langtrys had been living essentially separate lives for years. Ned had retreated entirely into alcoholism. He was barely functional as a social being, let alone as a husband in any intimate sense. The marriage existed in name only. Lillie told Prince Louis of Battenberg that the child was his. The young prince, terrified of the consequences, confessed everything to his parents. Their reaction was immediate and ruthless. Louis was assigned to HMS Inconstant, a Royal Navy warship that promptly departed on a 2-year voyage, putting an ocean between the young prince and the growing scandal. But modern historians, armed with the evidence from those 1978 letters, now believe that Prince Louis may not have been the father at all. The most likely candidate, they argue, was Arthur Jones, Darling Artie, the secret lover from Jersey. And the letters revealed something else. Something that even by modern standards is startling, and that Victorian society would have found utterly beyond the pale. According to the content of those letters, Lillie did not want this baby. She reportedly asked Jones to visit a pharmacy and obtain medicine that would cause her to miscarry. The request went nowhere. The plan was never carried out. But the letters paint a vivid portrait of a woman who was desperate, cornered, and genuinely terrified of what this pregnancy would do to the life she had so carefully constructed. The Prince of Wales, despite the end of their romantic relationship, showed a side of himself during this crisis that complicates any easy judgment of his character. He did not abandon Lillie. He gave her money. He helped arrange for her to leave London quietly, away from the relentless scrutiny of the press and the gossip columns. He managed the situation with the kind of discreet efficiency that suggested he had done this sort of thing before, which, of course, he almost certainly had. Lillie left for Paris, accompanied by Arthur Jones, and on March 8, 1881, she gave birth to a daughter. She named the girl John Marie. What happened next was a piece of Victorian deception that would carry consequences for decades. The baby was sent back to Jersey, handed over to Lillie's mother. Jean-Marie was raised believing that Lillie was her aunt, not her mother. The secret was maintained with absolute discipline. The child grew up on the island, knowing nothing of her true origins, nothing of the princes and the scandals and the love affairs that had brought her into the world. The truth about Jean-Marie's parentage would remain hidden for years. And when it was finally revealed, it would not bring mother and daughter together. It would tear them apart forever. But that reckoning lay in the future. In the immediate aftermath of the birth, Lillie Langtry had a more pressing concern. She was financially ruined. By November 1880, even before the baby was born, the Langtry finances had collapsed entirely. Ned was declared bankrupt. Creditors and bailiffs physically moved into their London home on Norfolk Street. The New York Times reported that the once famous Langtrys had fled their residence. Lillie Langtry, the woman who had dined with princes, been painted by the greatest artists of her generation, and had the future King of England build his schedule around her social diary, was facing complete and utter financial ruin. And this is where the story takes a turn that nobody in Victorian England, least of all the scandalized society matrons who had always viewed Lillie with a mixture of envy and contempt, could possibly have predicted. Lillie Langtry decided to go on the stage. In 1881, no respectable woman, let alone a woman who had been presented at the royal court, became an actress. The stage was considered barely a step above prostitution in the rigid social hierarchy of the Victorian era. For a woman of Lillie's social standing to appear in a theatre was not just unconventional, it was explosive. The idea was championed by her friend Oscar Wilde, who understood better than anyone that fame was its own form of capital, and that Lillie's notoriety could be converted directly into box office receipts. Sarah Bernhardt, the greatest actress alive, offered her encouragement. Henrietta Labouchere, an experienced performer, provided acting lessons. And the Prince of Wales, the man who had loved her and lost her and helped hide her pregnancy, quietly threw his weight behind the venture, using his influence to ensure that Lillie's theatrical debut would not be sabotaged by her enemies. On December 15, 1881, Lillie Langtry walked onto the stage of the Haymarket Theatre in London for a production of She Stoops to Conquer. The theatre was packed to the rafters, every seat was filled, people stood in the aisles. The audience included lords, ladies, politicians, newspaper editors, rival actresses consumed with jealousy and, sitting prominently in the royal box, visible to every single person in the house, the Prince of Wales himself. It was a sensation, but not, it must be honestly said, because of her acting. The critics were polite at best. Several were openly dismissive. One reviewer noted her lack of emotional range. Another commented on her uncertain timing. Lillie Langtry was not a gifted actress. She never would be. She never developed the technique, the discipline, or the raw theatrical instinct that separated a true performer from a merely competent one. Her voice lacked the power to fill a large theatre. Her movements on stage were sometimes awkward. She was, by any professional standard, a mediocre actress at best, but absolutely none of that mattered, not one bit, because the audience had not come to watch a performance. They had come to watch her, the Jersey Lillie, the former mistress of the Prince of Wales, the most scandalous, most photographed, most relentlessly discussed woman in all of England, standing right there on the stage in the flesh, close enough to see the colour of her famous violet eyes, close enough to study the complexion that had launched 1,000 postcards, close enough to understand, for the first time, what all the fuss had been about. And there was something else, something deeper and more significant than mere celebrity curiosity. Lillie Langtry was doing something that no woman of her social standing had ever done before. She was the first society woman to appear on the professional stage. In Victorian England, this was not just unusual, it was revolutionary. It shattered a class barrier that had been in place for centuries. It announced in the most public way possible that a woman who had been presented at court, who had dined with queens and princes, who had moved through the highest echelons of British society, could also earn her own living, could stand on her own 2 feet, could refuse to be destroyed by scandal and bankruptcy and abandonment. Bertie himself attended her performances multiple times in those early months, sitting prominently in the royal box, guaranteeing that the theatre would be packed to capacity and that every newspaper in London would cover every show. His presence was both an endorsement and a shield, a signal to society that Lillie Langtry, though no longer his mistress, remained under his protection. From that moment forward, Lillie Langtry never looked back, and she never needed a man to save her again. She became the first woman in recorded history to endorse a commercial product, lending her face and her name to Pears Soap in 1882, a partnership that essentially invented the concept of celebrity advertising as we know it today. The arrangement was brilliantly simple. Lillie's photograph appeared on the soap's packaging alongside the words, "I prefer Pears Soap to any other." Her famous ivory complexion, the complexion that had captivated painters and princes alike, was now being used to sell bars of glycerin soap to ordinary housewives across Britain. It was a stroke of marketing genius that would not be fully appreciated for another century. Every influencer deal, every celebrity fragrance, every sports shoe campaign that exists today can trace its lineage back to that moment in 1882 when a former royal mistress put her name on a bar of soap. Reportedly, her fee was calculated based on her body weight. She was paid, as the saying went, pound for pound. But Lillie's ambitions extended far beyond London and far beyond soap. She toured America to staggering success, crossing the Atlantic with her own production company and arriving in New York to the kind of rapturous reception usually reserved for visiting heads of state. American audiences, it turned out, were even more fascinated by her than the British had been. Here was a woman who had scandalized the greatest empire on earth, who had shared the bed of a future king, who had been painted by the finest artists and gossiped about in every newspaper, and now she was standing right there on an American stage, close enough to touch. She performed in theaters from coast to coast, drawing enormous audiences everywhere she appeared. The critics continued to be lukewarm about her acting abilities, but the public simply did not care. They came for the spectacle, for the scandal, for the sheer force of her celebrity, and Lillie gave them exactly what they wanted. She also invested with a shrewdness that would have impressed the most hardened Wall Street financier. She purchased a 6,500-acre ranch in Lake County, California, where she bred thoroughbred racehorses and operated a profitable winery. She bought property. She accumulated wealth. She transformed herself through sheer force of will from a bankrupt socialite into one of the richest self-made women of her era. She began a passionate 9-year relationship with Frederick Gebhard, a wealthy young American sportsman and horse enthusiast who was completely and utterly besotted with her. Gebhard was 22 when they met. She was 29, and he showered her with the kind of lavish attention that reminded everyone of her previous royal admirer. Together they bred racehorses, attended the most exclusive events in American society, and lived a life of extravagant luxury. There was speculation that they would eventually marry, but it never happened. Lillie, it seemed, had learned her lesson about matrimony the first time around. In 1887, she made a strategic decision that revealed the full extent of her pragmatism. She became an American citizen, not out of any affection for the United States, but because American divorce law was far more favorable to women than its English equivalent. She needed American citizenship to escape her dead-end marriage to Ned. In 1897, the divorce was finally granted, and in a grim coincidence that seemed almost too perfectly timed to be real, Edward Ned Langtry died that very same year. He was on a steamer crossing from Belfast to Liverpool when he suffered a brain hemorrhage following a fall on deck. He was 50 years old. It is worth pausing here to consider the man who was perhaps the greatest casualty of this entire story. Ned Langtry had never asked for any of this. He had sailed into Jersey Harbor on his yacht, married a beautiful girl, and wanted nothing more than a quiet life of fishing and country air. Instead, he was dragged to London against every instinct he possessed, forced to sit at the far end of dinner tables while his wife flirted with the Prince of Wales, made to endure the public humiliation of being the most famous cuckold in England, and finally abandoned. Financially, socially, and emotionally, when Lillie no longer had any use for him, he spent his final years alone, bankrupt, alcoholic, forgotten. While biographers have written hundreds of pages about Lillie's glamour and her genius for self-reinvention, almost nothing has been written about Ned Langtry except in the most dismissive terms. He is the ghost that haunts this story, the man who married a hurricane and was destroyed by it. 2 years after Ned's death in 1899, Lillie married again. Her new husband was Hugo Gerald de Baith, a man fully 19 years her junior. They married at St. Saviour's Church in Jersey, the same church where her father had preached, the same church where she had married Ned exactly a quarter of a century earlier. It was a ceremony heavy with echoes and ironies. The bride was 45 years old. The groom was 26. The setting was unchanged. Everything else was utterly transformed. When Hugo's father died in 1907, Hugo inherited the baronetcy and became the 5th Baronet de Bath. Lillie became Lady de Bath. It was a title that must have given her quiet satisfaction, a final permanent elevation from the rectory on Jersey to the ranks of the titled aristocracy. The clergyman's daughter was now officially and irrevocably a lady of rank, but one wound never healed, and it was the wound that cut deepest of all. When Jeanne-Marie, the daughter Lillie had hidden from the world, the child who had been raised as her aunt's niece on the island of Jersey, was finally told the truth about her origins, the revelation did not bring reconciliation. It brought destruction. At 14, Jeanne-Marie learned that Lillie was not her aunt but her mother. At 21, she was told that her biological father was not Edward Langtry, but Prince Louis of Battenberg. The double deception, years of lies layered upon lies, was more than Jean-Marie could accept. She severed all meaningful contact with Lillie. According to Jersey Heritage, from that moment forward, she treated her like a stranger. It is one of the cruelest and most poignant ironies of Lillie Langtry's extraordinary life. A woman who had conquered London society, captured the heart of a future king, invented celebrity endorsement, reinvented herself as an actress and businesswoman when every door seemed to be closing, could not hold on to her own daughter. The one relationship that should have mattered more than any prince or any stage or any society party was the one that she had sacrificed on the altar of her own ambition and her own survival. Meanwhile, Bertie had continued his relentless progression through mistresses. After Lillie came Daisy Warwick, an immensely wealthy heiress who would later convert to socialism in a twist that nobody saw coming. After Daisy came Alice Keppel, widely regarded as the great love of Bertie's life. Keppel was discreet, intelligent, and politically astute. She became so deeply embedded in Bertie's world that when he finally ascended the throne as King Edward VII in January 1901, she functioned almost as an unofficial advisor, serving as an intermediary between the king and his ministers. When Bertie lay dying on May 6, 1910, it was Alexandra, his wife of 47 years, who made the extraordinary decision to allow Alice Keppel to come to his bedside. Though Alexandra eventually lost her patience and had Keppel removed from the room, the gesture itself spoke volumes about the strange, complicated, deeply human arrangements that had defined Bertie's entire life. But through all the subsequent mistresses, through the decades that followed their affair, Bertie never forgot Lillie. He attended her theatrical performances for years after their romance ended. He used his royal influence to support her career. Their correspondence continued, friendly and warm, until his death. Lillie outlived Bertie by nearly 2 decades. She continued performing into her 60s, a remarkable feat in an era when most women of her age had long since retired from public life. She appeared in vaudeville in New York. She made one motion picture. She wrote her autobiography, The Days I Knew, published in 1925, a book that was characteristically entertaining and characteristically selective about which truths it chose to reveal. She retired to Monte Carlo, settling into a comfortable existence in the warm Mediterranean light. Hugo de Baith lived separately, in a house nearby. The marriage had never been close, and by this point it was essentially a legal formality. In her final years, Lillie's closest companion was reportedly her butler's widow, a woman named Matilda Peat. On February 12, 1929, Lillie Langtry died at her home in Monte Carlo. She was 75 years old. The cause was influenza, which triggered a fatal heart attack, and in death she went home. Her body was brought back to Jersey, the tiny island she had spent her whole life trying to escape, the place she had married Ned to leave, the place she had schemed and dreamed and burned to get away from. She was buried in the churchyard of St. Saviour's, in the shadow of the church where her father had preached his sermons and conducted his affairs, where she had married her first husband for the sake of a yacht, and where she had married her second husband for the sake of a title. And there is one final extraordinary detail that reaches across the centuries to connect Lillie Langtry's scandal directly, almost impossibly, to the present day. Prince Louis of Battenberg, the young naval officer, who Lillie named as the father of Jean-Marie, the man who was bundled onto a warship and sent away from England to escape the scandal, did not remain in exile forever. He returned, he rebuilt his reputation, and he made a marriage that placed him at the very heart of the European royal establishment. Louis married Princess Victoria of Hesse, and by Rhine, a granddaughter of Queen Victoria herself. Together, they had 4 children. Among those children was a son who would rise to become one of the most powerful and consequential figures in 20th century British history. A man who served as the last Viceroy of India, who oversaw the partition of the subcontinent, and who was assassinated by the IRA in 1979. His name was Louis Mountbatten, 1st Earl Mountbatten of Burma. Lord Mountbatten's sister, Princess Alice of Battenberg, married Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark. Alice endured a turbulent life, mental illness, exile, wartime heroism, and eventually the founding of a religious order of nursing nuns. She and Andrew had a son, born on the island of Corfu in 1921. His name was Philip. Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark later His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh, married Princess Elizabeth in Westminster Abbey in November 1947. Their eldest son, Charles, became King Charles III upon the death of Queen Elizabeth II in September 2022. He sits on the British throne today. Follow that chain of connections. If Lillie Langtry was telling the truth about Prince Louis of Battenberg being the father of her daughter Jean-Marie, and Earl Mountbatten himself stated publicly on multiple occasions throughout his life that he believed his father truly was the child's biological father, then Prince Philip's father and Jean-Marie Langtry were half-siblings, which means the secret, illegitimate daughter of the Jersey Lily is woven into the bloodline that produced the consort of the longest reigning monarch in British history. The truth of Jean-Marie's paternity may never be established with absolute certainty. The DNA evidence that could settle the question has never been sought, and perhaps never will be. But the possibility lingers like a ghost, a whisper of old scandal that drifts through the corridors of Buckingham Palace, refusing to be silenced, connecting the most audacious love affair of the Victorian age to the royal family that occupies the throne in our own time. A clergyman's daughter from a speck of an island in the English Channel. A woman who married a man for his yacht and ended up in the bed of a future king. A scandal that electrified Victorian England. A secret pregnancy that produced a child whose bloodline may, just may, connect to the current occupants of the British throne. Lillie Langtry did not merely survive the scandal, she conquered it. She transformed notoriety into a career, heartbreak into reinvention, and a single black dress into the most unforgettable entrance in London history. She was the original celebrity, the first woman to turn beauty into a brand, and a force of nature that the British establishment simply could not contain. And that is the story of Lillie Langtry and the Prince of Wales, a story of ambition, beauty, betrayal, and forbidden desire that changed the face of the British monarchy forever. If this story kept you watching, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. We've got more royal scandals coming that are even more shocking than this one. Drop a comment and tell me, do you think Lillie truly loved Bertie? Or was the Prince of Wales just another stepping stone in the most brilliant social climb of the 19th century? I read every single comment. Until next time, this has been Pure British Scandals.